Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast, where we talk with early stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast. Today I have Chris Chance, who's the founder and CEO of Aerotronic. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start off with a pitch for Aerotronic.
So Aerotronic, we do power line inspection and predictive maintenance with manned helicopters, AI, and we also design and manufacture our own single-rotor, like autonomous helicopter.
Which I'm looking at an early prototype of one of those right now, right?
That's correct.
I would say that's 4 feet.
It's about 6.5.
Oh, 6.5, that far off? Okay, wow. So 6.5 foot red drone looking thing, power supply has been taken out of it, or I'm guessing the whole drivetrain has been taken out of it.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it's a static display for the office.
And then, so when that thing is operational, what is that battery powered? Is it gas powered?
So there's a hybrid drivetrain that we developed specifically for this aircraft. It's a single cylinder gas and electric. It allows it to fly one way for 500 miles, but really, we're not a drone company. Nobody pays us to fly the drone.
Right.
It's just a means to an end.
So you said today you're still doing that with manned flights?
Yeah, we use regular manned helicopters.
So talk a little bit about that. So when you're selling, you're calling a power company like Duke or somebody like that?
Right. So our customers are the power companies themselves.
Okay. Then do you own helicopters? Do you rent helicopters? How does that work?
Right now, we've been renting the helicopters. There's one customer we're talking to where they have some unique requirements that might cause us to lease a helicopter so that we have dedicated access to one aircraft. But no, typically we rent.
And then you have to rig these up with special equipment. I'm assuming camera equipment, stuff like that.
Yeah. So we have some special camera equipment that we make the sensor packages of visual camera, UV camera, infrared, and we also have LiDAR, like a big laser scanner thing. So we package that all up together and stick it on the helicopter.
All right. So for somebody who's listening, paint a picture, use whatever vanity metrics you're happy to use to maybe tell the story of where you guys are on the journey as a company.
My favorite one is when the helicopters are actually flying. The company currently today is generating revenue at $25,000 an hour. And then when that we get fully progressed in our technical roadmap, that will go up to about $50,000 an hour.
And what is the primary driver of that efficiency?
We get paid per mile, but our costs are per hour. So if we can fly the helicopter fast enough, then we get an arbitrary amount of revenue per hour.
So the faster those sensors are working and you can process the images. And
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. It's in that, I'm assuming this, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming the machine learning piece is in that image processing?
A good chunk of it is, yeah. There's actually some additional things that have to go on for contextual awareness or comparison between different sensor platforms. You never want to rely on just one sensor to get data. It's far more accurate if you can have multiple sensors with different approaches to the analysis, and then you use statistics to amalgamate that all back together. It's a lot more robust.
And what types of things are you looking for? I mean, so in my mind, like an obvious thing is like a broken line, something stupid, simple like that. But that's not what you're looking for, right? Like, what are the types of things that you're trying to catch?
Right. So features are always reflective of the market. So that's kind of really a market question. The customers have two different groups that we interface with. One is the vegetation management group, and the other is the pole top maintenance group. So the vegetation piece, they're looking for trees, their clearances to the lines, and speciation. So like what kind of tree is it? So they can forecast when they're going to need to take some sort of management action on which tree, and that really helps them get their costs down.
Okay.
That's one data product. The other data product that we have is geared towards the pole top maintenance group, and they're concerned about keeping the lights on. The pole top components, like there's a whole host of stuff when you look up at a power pole, and we give them a report of exactly what's broken and where it is so that they can easily digest that and plan when they need to go work on things.
Because it's such a redundant system, you can have broken stuff and it's not necessarily going to cause a blackout or loss of power.
I think a better way to think of it is graceful failure. These components are designed to go from working to not working in a slow, gradual process. Because you don't have a lot of redundancy, that's really important. And they do a good job of it. What we do is we help them forecast when it is that they need to pay attention to what.
Okay, got it. Before we get into the competition stuff, how did you end up here? Like, this feels so niche.
It was a very unusual journey. My first company, we made a hardware software stack with drones for precision agriculture. And like most first-time entrepreneurs, I think I made every mistake that there was, and I may have invented a couple. It was terrible. But I managed to get it to an acqui-hire, which also was a little shaky. The company that acquired us went out of business for unrelated reasons shortly thereafter. And it was just a disaster. But I really liked entrepreneurship. So I went back and I started Aerotronic with my co-founder. And I said, hey, so I'm a helicopter pilot and an aerospace engineer, and I know a little bit about drones. There's a huge gap in the market that I see coming for hardware that looks exactly like this for this kind of mission. That was correct. I got that part right. We built the solution for that gap and totally nailed it. What we didn't see coming was no one was going to buy it. Selling individual airframes is a terrible business model, and it's just none of that worked.
So you originally built these to sell to the power company themselves, or to
anybody,
other contractors, whoever?
Right. We built it to be a flying pickup truck that's as general purpose as possible, provided there's some limitations if you're inspecting a linear asset of some kind.
Got it. Okay.
So that didn't work. We realized that we needed some fresh thinking and some coaching. So we applied to Techstars, and we're very fortunate we got in. It's got less than a 1% acceptance rate, but somehow they picked us.
Because you're the cool red drone, dude.
Well, hopefully that's part of it. Yeah, so Techstars was amazing. We had amazing...
Did you do that up in Chicago?
We did that in Detroit.
In Detroit, okay. Yeah.
So that was Ted Serbinsky's program. He's an amazing guy. And we had tons of access to really, really smart people to help us iterate and work through business models. And a lot of the zeitgeist that Techstars has developed about how startups should work and what makes them not work. So that process really transformed us. And out of that came, hey, we need to be a service business. We need to focus on one thing. That one thing needs to obviously have good unit economics and have a huge market. And it needs to allow us to use our existing work in a way that's going to give us a big competitive advantage, and will allow us to jump off into other markets in a few years after we've really started to gain significant market traction in that space. So the thing that fit all of those criteria was power line inspection.
That's a great jumping point. When you look at the power market inspection market, who are your competitors?
There's really two camps that are related to us. There's traditional aerial inspection, which I would say probably has 10 to 20% market share right now. Numbers are a little fuzzy. They're manned helicopters, and they're either doing vegetation patrols with aerial LiDAR, or they're doing pull-top inspections with a dude with binoculars. Sometimes they're a little more sophisticated about that, and they have like big fancy cameras and stuff. But overall, it's a pretty manual, clunky way to do it, and the technology's all from the early 90s, and it's okay, it works, but it's not amazing. The other class is slick tech startups, and they're trying to use drones for this stuff and blah, blah, blah. They don't use manned helicopters, which there's a lot of power lines. It's like using a drone for power lines is like trying to mow a golf course with a weed eater. It's just you have a fundamental scale problem.
I like that. Okay.
And by that, I mean like little quadcopters or something, or even fixed wing drones. It's like, and then they have, there's regulation problems, and I could go on, but those are the two groups. So we kind of have pulled successful elements from both clusters of competitors and try to make like a best of album with our company. And that seems to be working.
Before we turn on the mics, we were talking about your prototype that's in here with us. And I had asked if someday you guys would move to that down the road. Is that still part of the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, because the messaging can get a little weird, right now, we do not use drones commercially.
Yep.
We use manned helicopters. When we do switch to drones, we will use ours and only ours. We purpose-built it specifically for this, and it has a lot of capabilities that do not exist in other aircraft. The interesting point, the reason that we would do that is it's not so much for the cost structure. A lot of people assume, hey, so, these drones are going to improve your cost structure and that's what's going to, move the needle. Totally not true. If you sit down and you really derive, we only pay like $10 a mile for the helicopter, right? But our retail rates are $1,000 a mile. So there's not a lot there to be saved. Where that makes a big difference is it allows you to do things massively in parallel. So, we could have 100, we call this dauntless. We could have 100 and each collecting at 50 miles an hour. That allows us to, hypothetically collect at 5,000 miles an hour. So you can do large customers very quickly. Also, because all of our processing is done in the cloud and it's autonomous, it's easy to, split that up and parallelize it so that you can get lots of work done very quickly. That's really the reason for the drones.
Which you could not spin up 500 very likely you couldn't spin up 500 helicopters on command.
And that's another reason why we rent is that's going to be $500,000 to $1 million just parked on the ground before you even turn it on.
Right.
Storage, maintenance, training, blah, blah, blah. So you do not want to have 100 of these. And that really defines the maximum size of companies that rely on manned aviation, is you get to a point where your fixed costs get really high in order to get your capability up and your capacity up. But the only way you can make money is on these massive jobs. So you're really missing when you chart this out on a piece of paper, like you can see visually, like you're missing a huge chunk of the market that way. And you just paint yourself in this corner to where most of the market is no longer profitable to access. So you need the capacity that you get from manned helicopters, but you need the costs of drones. And that lets you go anywhere in the market and make money.
How big of a player are you today in the market? Tiny? Okay.
I'm the captain of the SS Driftwood. But we're getting bigger quickly.
Right on. So talk a little bit about that journey. So at what point, so you'd said, I guess I'll go directly to one of the things that you said in your outline of Techstars. Get good at the one market, get significant market penetration there before you start to look at how do you apply that technology in other markets, right? So I guess the question that I'm interested in is how long do you think it takes you to get to big enough market penetration in utility specifically for you to then say, okay, or line inspection, maybe that's even the right way to think about it, is just line inspection. And then where would you go next and how different would that be?
Yeah. So there's two directions that could go. One is you just keep your foot completely on the gas and focus exclusively on one thing until you just can't grow anymore. And then you start to worry about expansion. That's a totally valid strategy. It's not the one that we're going to take. Our thinking is when we develop technology and we have, self-sustaining business unit built around power lines, and it in no way impacts future sales on our core business, then we can repackage that technology, set up a separate team, and go shop it around. The likely place that we'll go will be forestry, due to the technology that we've had developed for the vegetation management. That may not prove to be profitable. I don't know. Frankly, that's far enough off. I haven't done a ton of diligence.
Yeah.
There's one other area that I find really interesting, and that's mining prospecting. One of my family members owns a copper mine. So I know a bit about how the mining industry works, and it's really fascinating.
Wait, one of your family members owns a copper mine? That's not real.
That's a real thing.
People still own copper like that? Okay. All right. Somebody owns a copper mine.
Yeah. Well, I'm from Alaska. That's a lot more normal.
Okay. Now that actually feels believable. All right. Right on.
Yeah. So there's a lot of inefficiency because mining is so fundamental to the economy that like really influences GDP. I think if you're like me and you want to make money, but you also want to make a difference in the world, paying attention to like utilities and the things underneath them, like mining and just basic industrial activity, is really a good place to drive improvements for everybody.
Yeah. So when you look at emerging technologies, you're kind of already on the bleeding edge in a number of ways. What are the things that you see that are just emerging right now that are kind of exciting to you that you think that you'll be able to apply in the work that you're doing?
So one thing that I think is really interesting is the shift in how technology is developed and implemented. You used to have this cycle where you'd have closed source development that would stay in one company, and then eventually the patents would expire and everybody would get their hands on it. Or occasionally you'd have something that went through DARPA, and the same thing would happen on just a shorter time scale. The technology that really is driving a lot of growth right now is in the machine learning space. And because it's all powered by universities and they publish all their like training data and weights and stuff, commercial enterprises are able to incorporate advances in ML and robotics way, way faster than ever would have been possible before. And I think that's a subtle but very important shift in how things get done that I don't know if everyone fully appreciates.
This episode is brought to you by Full Stack PEO. Most founders start companies because they figured out a better way to solve a problem or serve a need, not because they love tracking payroll, filling out compliance forms, and explaining employee benefits packages. And yet, all that stuff still has to be done. That's why there's Full Stack PEO. Full Stack PEO specializes in turnkey HR for emerging companies, not just those core services, but advice and expertise that help founders maximize employee potential. Curious? Find out more at fullstackpeo.com.
Anything else on around bleeding edge technology or things that are coming up that you look to and you're kind of excited by because you think you'll be able to leverage it?
Yeah, some specific technologies that I find really interesting. Self-driving cars are developing a lot of unique solutions for their problems, right? They need to do real-time analysis of spatial data. They need to have really high resolution sensors. They need to coordinate between each other. Like these are like novel problems that have never been solved, maybe outside of a research lab, but even then, not really. And there's going to be a lot of spillover of that technology into adjacent industries. Case in point, we use our LiDAR sensors are developed by a company called Ouster, and they do self-driving car LiDAR sensors, and they have a bunch of unique features specific for feeding into a machine learning workflow. Whereas legacy sensors, good luck, right? There's just fundamentally the data was never structured that way, and doing anything with it is going to be a tremendous pain in the ass.
That totally makes sense. Nice. When you're selling Aerotronic, it like when you're in the room pitching, do they care that you're technology enabled, or do they just look at capability and track record and say, well, you're roughly the same cost or a little bit cheaper than the way we typically do it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting dynamic where you have, us, we're tech enabled services, and then we're talking to utilities.
Right.
One is to stay in the realm of generalisms, then you're like, oh, wow, that's going to get clunky. Reality is more nuanced than that. You actually talk to 12 different people in that company. So depending on who I'm talking to and what group they're from, there's a wide range of narrative options for me to pick from.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's an enterprise sale. So
right.
You're bringing along a bunch of people on that journey.
Yeah.
How long is the sales cycle?
About 6 months.
That's good. So I'm specifically thinking of one of our portfolio companies where we have a pretty long enterprise sales cycle, and I feel like we've been able to get it down a little bit, but it's still just a process each and every time.
Yeah. So we are just wrapping up with our first sales cycle. We're in the very final stages of contract negotiation. I can't really talk about with who just right this second, but we should have a contract in place in the next 2 weeks. That's great. We've been doing around $50,000 a month in revenue since December on pilots, demos, studies, these sorts of things. And that's expected to continue.
So this will be your first long-term, like locked in.
Right. Yeah.
Congrats, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome.
It's cool to make the jump from this is like dating and then now we're moving in together. And so it's really exciting.
That is cool. Can I ask how, and your answer could be it totally depends, but is that, so like, is there a typical length for that kind of contract? Is that like a 2-year commitment, a 6-month commitment? What does that look like?
Yeah, it looks like we're going to be on a 3-year commitment.
Okay.
We've kind of gone out of our way to incentivize that because, one contract is brittle. So you want to make sure that you have predictable revenue for a long enough period of time that you can go build up the sales engine and get multiple contracts simultaneously.
Nice. And then when you think about expansion, is that, because I'm thinking about the physical assets that it takes in your business, I'm assuming you do that regionally and you slowly start to spiral out from a geographic region, or could your next deal be in California and like, that's cool, let's do it?
Yeah, California's fine.
Okay. So it doesn't matter because you're renting helicopters, not buying. It doesn't matter where you're going.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. The economics support, I don't want to talk about how thick our margins are in case there's any customers listening, but
right.
The economics really support global deployment.
So it's interesting. You replied really quick, California is fine. Is there a state I could have said that wouldn't have been just because you know that like this is not as big of a problem in that state? Like Kansas doesn't have a lot of tree encroachment in my mind anyway. Maybe that's not true. So it's just
Arizona
less of a problem
doesn't
there.
have a lot of vegetation and that equipment there's not as much weathering that goes on.
Interesting. So there are markets where it's just not as...
Yeah, the value proposition is stronger in some places and weaker in others.
Okay.
That's just a function of the geography of wherever you're talking about. But no, I mean, as we've calculated, our TAM is about $2 billion annually. So,
does your cost of goods sold change by geography? Specifically, what I'm thinking about there is whether it's like to fly in certain like mountainous regions, you need better trained pilots who cost more, or different. Like, is there anything like that is significant, or if the margins are big enough at all, it's all a wash?
Definitely nothing that's going to make its way to the bottom line, but there is the technical challenges with different regions are somewhat interesting. And I think it speaks to a broader point about how automation gets proliferated through the economy. You start off with basic automation that's only robust enough for simple environments where everything is very structured. Like Arizona, right? You could see all the poles, flat ground, good visibility, nothing crazy. And then you've got some place like Vermont where there's tons of hills, tons of trees, tiny old lines that are super broken, winds and weather and all this stuff. And there's a whole spectrum in between there. So as we develop new technology, which, we subscribe to the agile development method, of course. So, we're constantly coming out with new features. And then as we iterate them, they're able to penetrate into more and more complex environments. So the more complex environments require a little more hands-on supervision to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And that does increase our costs a little bit, but not enough to matter.
You started 2015?
Yeah.
Or you started your first company in 2015?
No, started my first company in 2012.
Okay. So 2015, when you started this company, what would you say are the biggest 1 or 2 things that you've learned from between then and now, specifically in scaling this business?
The biggest thing is, I think a lesson that all business owners continually has to learn is figure out what you're not good at and then find somebody who is good at that to fill that gap. Especially young business owners, you tend to think, I'm good at everything, and if not, I'm going to get there. Maybe you will get there, but in the meantime, it's going to be a lot easier, and you'll get there a lot faster if you find somebody to tell you what you're not good at and how to do it. Super important. That's the biggest thing.
Did you get a lot of that out of Techstars?
Oh, God, yes. Definitely.
Okay. Because I'm trying to think where most people would get that kind of direct feedback, right? My experience has been most people are shy to give an entrepreneur that kind of direct feedback, right? Where in a program like Techstars, they're not going to be shy at all.
No. And you're going to listen too, because the guy who's telling it to you had an exit and he personally walked out with $100 million and, he's like 30 and he understands exactly how all this works. If you don't listen to him, it's because you're an idiot, right?
Right. All right. And then number 2, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no. The other thing that I've learned is an appreciation for this like test, hypothesize, test like cycle. It's one thing to understand in the abstract, like, oh yeah, of course I need to guess and check because that's how the universe works. It's another to actually learn that skill in an operational fashion and like, okay, how do I actually apply this right this second and figure out what we need to know? Maybe what we think we know is wrong, or maybe there's a better way or whatever. How do you operationalize that? That's the biggest other big
Do you have an example of you doing that?
Yeah. So there was a lot of that how we arrived at our current business model. When you first come up with a new model, your initial guesses about what people care about and how the industry at large works are just crap. They're always wrong. So you need to get out of that very quickly. So we were able to deploy some basically scientific method to figure out, okay, what do people care about? And it's not what we thought, but we were able to confirm it with a high degree of confidence because, yeah, basically we use the scientific method explicitly, complete with like statistics and everything. It's just there's a pre-existing body of thought on how to discover things and be confident about them.
So this is for line inspection in particular, right? When you're trying to for this business model. Mm-hmm. So so most people would tell a story of I just went out and talked to X number of utility customers. They told me this, and I know I discount that until they actually sign a contract and blah, blah, blah. Did you do something different than that? Was it not just going out and talking to potential customers? Yeah, we did. So I'm a really big fan of a movement called Bayesian rationality. Okay. Which is like Bayes' law, which I think is a crowning achievement of statistics personally. And how to apply it to real life situations. Because oftentimes it's computationally intractable to sit down and try and like, okay, you get stuck immediately. You can't do it. But there's a whole philosophy around it. And yeah, it's not fully rigorous in the scientific sense, but you can definitely take pieces of information and assign like bits of confidence and cluster things together and assign some weights. And yeah, you can get a little mathy with it if you want to. All right. Right on. What's the biggest thing you're working on now personally that you want to level up in from a business perspective? The short game, I think everybody kind of has by default just from being in the entrepreneurship game. The long game, everybody is like, they have their pet mission that they want. It's the middle game, like the 6 months out window. And so much of that is just on operational proficiency and like having solid execution, documenting things, making sure that, your project management is done, make sure your budgets are super tight. Just being a good middle manager is a really underrated skill. So that's something that I'm putting a lot of energy into right now. I love that answer. That is a very surprising answer. And it's very timely. I want to say like either this morning or last night, I can't remember when I saw this, but the Wall Street Journal, I can't remember who even the publication was, but it was something like America's going to be saved by heroic middle managers, something like that. Like that task focus, that mid-game task focus is a really powerful thing. That's cool. All right. If people want to get in touch with you and learn more, how do they do that? I'm on Twitter at _Chris_Chance. Okay. Leading _ great trick if you're trying to get something that's taken. And then, of course, I'm on, LinkedIn, and our website is aerotronic.com. Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it. No sweat.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.